The rain fell in sheets across London, casting a silver veil over the iconic grounds of Buckingham Palace. Puddles shimmered under grey skies, their ripples disturbed only by the wind that howled through the gates. Yet amidst this storm, a lone figure stood unmoving, Sergeant Ewan Catterick of the Queen's Guard. His scarlet tunic, now soaked dark burgundy, clung tightly to his frame as freezing rain dripped from the brim of his bearskin cap and down the polished barrel of his ceremonial rifle. Though tourists had long since scattered for cover, the soldier remained rooted to his post, a sentinel shaped by discipline, legacy, and tradition. Weather alerts had warned of dangerous conditions, flash flooding, gale force winds, and plummeting temperatures. Most ceremonial duties had been quietly scaled back, but not the guard. Their stationing remained, as always, untouched by compromise. Catterick didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, jaw clenched, fingers numb inside his white gloves. Cold had seeped deep through every layer of his uniform, and yet he stood, as immovable as the palace itself. He drew upon training and muscle memory, subtle shifts in stance, regulated breaths, anchoring his focus to a stone on the palace wall to keep the pain at bay. Unseen beneath the uniform, a scar on his shoulder, a remnant of shrapnel from a peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, ached more sharply in the cold. Yet this discomfort was nothing new. He had served 12 years in the armed forces, Afghanistan, NATO joint training, UN missions. This post, steeped in ceremonial grandeur, was for him another chapter in a legacy. His grandfather had stood in the London fog of 1952, his father during the freeze of 71. Now, it was his turn. As thunder cracked and the marble beneath him grew slick, he recalled his grandfather's words, "Discomfort passes. Dignity remains." A mantra now etched into his very bearing, from beneath the stone colonnades. A handful of tourists huddled with raised phones, watching the soaked soldier with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Among them was Dr. Margaret Ashbury, a history professor at King's College, leading a small group of students on a royal tradition tour, one severely disrupted by the storm. Her eyes kept returning to the guard, tracking each subtle shift in his posture. She knew the tradition. She had lectured on it. But seeing it now, the cost of such rigidity, struck her differently. A tremor in his gloved hands caught her trained eye. His lips, barely visible, had begun turning blue. Her academic detachment gave way to rising concern. "We should head to Westminster Abbey," her assistant urged. "They've opened early because of the weather." In a moment, Ashbury replied, her gaze never leaving the guard. "This has gone on far too long." The rain intensified. A bolt of lightning fractured the sky, and a gust of wind nearly lifted umbrellas from their owners' hands. Still, Sergeant Catterick did not move. His discipline held, but just barely. Dr. Ashbury made up her mind. She approached a palace staff member standing nearby under a large black umbrella. "I'm Dr. Ashbury, King's College," she began. "That guard has been out there in hazardous conditions for nearly 2 hours. Surely there are exceptions in such weather." The staffer, polite but unyielding, replied with rehearsed calm, "The Queen's Guard adheres to centuries-old ceremonial protocols. They are trained for all conditions. But those centuries didn't account for what we now understand about hypothermia," she countered. "He's clearly in danger." Again came the refrain, tradition. Monitoring. Regulation. Frustrated, Dr. Ashbury returned to her students. One asked, "Is he going to be all right?" With visible anger, she answered, "Apparently, tradition trumps welfare." The growing tension on the palace grounds was broken by the sudden approach of a sleek burgundy Bentley, its tires whispering over wet gravel. The royal standard flew above the hood. The crowd shifted, drawn to the unexpected arrival. From the vehicle stepped the Duchess of Cambridge, her cream coat stark against the stormy backdrop. Close behind her, in a bright yellow raincoat, was 9-year-old Princess Charlotte, a burst of color in the gloom. Their presence was unplanned, a detour caused by flooding along their usual route, Charlotte's eyes immediately fixed on Sergeant Cataric. "Mommy," she said, tugging her mother's sleeve. "That guard is standing in the rain without cover." "He's upholding his duty," the Duchess replied softly, her gaze landing on the shivering figure. "It's part of the tradition." "But isn't there a rule about this?" Charlotte pressed. "I read it in history class. Queen Victoria did something when the guards were caught in a storm." "Something about Queen Charlotte's provision?" The Duchess paused, surprised. "What exactly do you remember?" Charlotte brightened. "Miss Winters taught us. In 1795, Queen Charlotte made a rule during a storm, and Queen Victoria formalized it. It lets the royal family acknowledge guards in dangerous weather." The palace aide nearby stiffened, clearly caught off guard. "The royal weather consideration?" he murmured. "That hasn't been invoked in years." Charlotte stepped forward with regal seriousness far beyond her age. "I think it should be now." The Duchess studied her daughter, eyes narrowing not with skepticism, but respect. Charlotte's insistence carried the clarity of both compassion and confidence, the unmistakable tone of someone invoking knowledge, not just emotion. A palace official, still trying to regain control of the rapidly evolving situation, stepped forward with careful deference. "Your Royal Highness, I assure you, Sergeant Cataric is being monitored." But Charlotte stood firm. Queen Charlotte's reign provision. It was meant for exactly this. Miss Winters said it let someone from the royal family formally recognize the guard and provide shelter, without violating duty. The Duchess turned to the official. "Is this provision still valid?" He hesitated. "It exists, yes. It was last used during the blizzard of 2010. Rare, but not forgotten." Charlotte's voice, steady but urgent, cut through. "May I, Mommy? He's been standing there so long. Even his eyelashes have rain on them." The Duchess exchanged one final glance with the official. Then she nodded. "Very well," she said. "Let's honor the tradition, and the person." The moment hung in the air like held breath. From the royal car, an aide retrieved a distinctive navy umbrella with gold trim and a royal crest embroidered in every panel. This was no ordinary umbrella, it was the ceremonial shield that signified royal weather consideration. It had not been publicly seen in over a decade. As Charlotte accepted it with reverent care, a quiet ripple passed through the small crowd. Even Dr. Ashbury, stunned, moved a few steps forward, whispering to her students, "She's invoking a royal protocol most historians only read about." The palace official, now visibly more composed, turned to the captain of the guard. "Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte is prepared to enact Queen Charlotte's reign provision." The captain nodded, then addressed the crowd in formal tones. This protocol, dating back to 1795, was established when Queen Charlotte observed a guard standing through a violent storm. It was later reinforced by Queen Victoria in 1861. It allows for the acknowledgement of extraordinary duty under dangerous weather without compromising the dignity or function of the guard. Charlotte looked up at the rain, then stepped forward. With the rain still pouring, Princess Charlotte moved forward, carrying the ceremonial umbrella with both hands. Every step she took mirrored a tradition centuries old, carefully measured and symbolic. The captain of the guard preceded her by 3 paces, stopping at the designated ceremonial distance from Sergeant Cataric. Turning formally, he called out, "Sergeant Ewan Cataric of Her Majesty's Royal Guard. Her Royal Highness, Princess Charlotte, approaches with the royal weather consideration." Sergeant Cataric didn't move at first, but his eyes, though bloodshot and weary, flickered with the faintest awareness. He had been trained for this moment, though likely never expected it would happen in his time. Charlotte stepped closer, her voice strong despite the weather. "Sergeant Cataric," she said, "in recognition of extraordinary service during adverse conditions, I present the royal weather consideration." She raised the umbrella, rotating it precisely as the protocol dictated, crest-centered, angle exact. She then advanced one measured step, placing herself within the ceremonial boundary, by authority granted through Queen Charlotte's provision of 1795 and Queen Victoria's formalization of 1861, your extraordinary service is acknowledged. The Crown recognizes duty fulfilled beyond measure. At her words, two junior officers stepped forward. One placed a brass position marker on the exact spot Katarik had occupied, preserving his post while allowing him reprieve. The other prepared to receive the umbrella. The captain addressed the motionless guard. "Sergeant, the royal weather consideration has been invoked. Acknowledge and proceed." For the first time in hours, Katarik moved. With precise formality, he executed the designated gesture of acceptance. His voice, though hoarse, was steady. "The consideration is acknowledged with gratitude. Duty continues under royal acknowledgement." The rain still fell, but something in the air had shifted. Dr. Ashbury watched in awe as the rarely seen tradition unfolded. "It's brilliant," she whispered. "The guard's duty isn't broken, it's honored, adjusted, and preserved." The ceremonial umbrella remained over Sergeant Katarik, now held by a junior officer. Katarik maintained his stance, posture unbroken, but protected. His face, though still pale, bore a subtle expression of renewed steadiness. Not comfort, but recognition. A burden made lighter by shared respect, Princess Charlotte stood beside him for a brief moment longer. "Are you feeling better now, Sergeant Katarik?" she asked, eyes wide with sincerity. "Yes, Your Royal Highness," he replied. "The Crown's consideration is deeply appreciated." The Duchess joined her daughter, offering a nod of pride. "Sergeant, your dedication today has been exemplary." "It is my honor to serve, Your Royal Highness." The captain of the guard stepped forward again. "The royal weather consideration remains in effect until hazardous conditions cease. All active guards shall maintain position under modified protocol." Dr. Ashbury found herself addressed by the palace official once more. "We appreciate your concern, Doctor. There are, as you've seen, protocols, rarely used, but always in place. If you enjoy this content, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Your subscription means a lot to me and gives me great motivation to make more videos. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the video." She nodded. "I see now. My lectures on these traditions. I've understood the theory, but today I saw the purpose." He offered a quiet smile. "That's how tradition survives. Not through rigidity, but through meaning, and adaptability." As the Duchess and Princess Charlotte prepared to depart, the young royal turned one last time to Sergeant Katarik. "My teacher says Queen Victoria cared deeply about guards in the rain because her father became ill reviewing troops in a storm. Your Royal Highness has an impressive command of royal history," Katarik said, genuine respect in his voice. Charlotte smiled thoughtfully. "I just like understanding why we do things, not just what we do." Dr. Ashbury gathered her students. "You've witnessed living history today," she told them. "This is how traditions endure, by balancing reverence with reason." As the royal car pulled away, the gathered crowd stood in stunned reverence. Most had come expecting nothing more than tourist snapshots, a quick glimpse of palace routine. Instead, they had witnessed a moment that felt like something out of a forgotten chapter in history. For Sergeant Katarik, the storm still raged, but the atmosphere around him had transformed. No longer just a symbol of stoic endurance, he now stood as a living testament to mutual respect. The soldier upheld his post, and the crown had answered with recognition. The umbrella with its gold-trimmed panels remained overhead, still held in ceremonial position. Though Katarik remained in stance, the subtle tremble in his hands had eased, and his expression, though still set, now held a trace of calm focus. Nearby, the captain of the guard was coordinating quiet adjustments. Guards at other exposed posts began to receive similar weather-modified considerations, not breaking position, but subtly reinforced through approved ceremonial substitutions. The tradition had not been broken. It had evolved. Dr. Ashbury watched all of this with growing admiration. This, she murmured to her students, is tradition done right. Not frozen in time, but living, responsive. Still bound by form, but guided by purpose. A student asked, "Do you think the Queen ever meant for it to be used this way?" She answered without hesitation. "I think Queen Charlotte would be proud. And Queen Victoria? She would have insisted on it." Inside the palace, word of the event spread swiftly. Senior aides relayed the moment to the Lord Chamberlain, who in turn forwarded the account to the private secretary's office. It was unusual, yes, but by no means improper. The royal weather consideration had never been abolished. It simply hadn't been necessary in years. The Duchess, once inside, quietly removed her gloves and placed them beside a copy of the court circular. She glanced down at Charlotte, who had returned to quiet composure. "Well done," she said softly. Charlotte hesitated. "Was it all right? I didn't want to get in trouble." "You honored the tradition. And more importantly, you remembered what it was for." Charlotte looked thoughtful, not proud. "Miss Winters says rules are strong when they protect people, not when they forget them." The Duchess smiled faintly. "I believe Miss Winters is a wise teacher." Elsewhere in the palace, the captain of the guard updated his log. The record would include full notation of the event, time, conditions, personnel involved, and most importantly, the invocation of Queen Charlotte's reign provision. A formal copy would be archived alongside its few other occurrences across the past 2 centuries. Even among seasoned staff, there was a kind of quiet reverence for what had taken place. It reminded them all, sometimes the oldest traditions only show their true value when the weather turns. As the storm finally began to ease, the last raindrops sliding off the palace roof, Dr. Ashbury brought her students to gather beneath the archway once more. The energy among them had shifted from restlessness to reflection. "You were supposed to see Westminster today," she said, "but I think what you saw here was far more important." The students nodded. One spoke up. "It wasn't just history. It became history." Dr. Ashbury nodded. "Exactly. Most traditions begin with meaning, but over time, people forget why they started. Today, we saw one remembered, and used the way it was meant to be." A few steps away, a palace official approached quietly. "Dr. Ashbury," he said, offering a modest smile. "The royal household recognizes your concern. Most people wouldn't have noticed, or spoken up." She accepted the compliment with humility. "I thought I understood the tradition," she said. "I didn't realize how gracefully it could bend without breaking." "That's the mark of a good tradition," the official replied. "Strong enough to endure, wise enough to change." As the official returned to his duties, one student looked at the empty space where Sergeant Katarik had once stood, now marked by the small brass position pole gleaming in the weak sunlight. "Do you think he'll be all right?" she asked. "I do," Ashbury said. "And more than that, I think he'll know that his service was truly seen." Back at the palace gate, the ceremonial guard rotation resumed under adjusted protocol. Guards remained in position, but new markers and weather modifications reflected a revived awareness. Tradition did not need to be heartless to be dignified. Among the soaked crowd still lingering outside the palace, a new energy pulsed, less about spectacle and more about reverence. The tourists who had once viewed the Queen's Guard as photo ops now whispered about legacy and respect. One man, an older veteran who had stood silently throughout the event, murmured to himself, "Never thought I'd see it invoked. Charlotte's reign provision. My father told me about it once, thought it was more myth than memory." Dr. Ashbury caught his words and stepped closer. "You served?" she asked. "Cold War," he nodded. British Army. Germany. Back then, we thought the old traditions would vanish. But watching her, that little princess, recall one like she'd lived through it. That's something. She didn't just remember it, Ashbury replied. She understood it. That's rarer still. The old man smiled. Well, the monarchy might just be in good hands. Up above, in one of the upper palace windows, a staff member closed a curtain softly. Within, a report lay on a polished desk, freshly typed and sealed with the royal crest, implementation of Queen Charlotte's reign provision, June 6, 2025, beneath the heading, initiated by Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte of Cambridge. Later that evening, as the rain gave way to a pale golden dusk, Princess Charlotte sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, flipping through a worn children's book on royal customs. The pages were annotated with little sticky notes, her own thoughts, questions, favorite facts. Her mother sat nearby, scrolling through a few official messages on her tablet, but watching Charlotte out of the corner of her eye. "Mommy?" Charlotte asked. "Yes, darling. Do you think traditions are more important when people need them, or only when they notice them?" The Duchess paused, thoughtful. "That's an interesting question. What do you think?" Charlotte considered. "I think they're most important when they protect people. But they should be remembered even when things seem fine, so we don't forget to care." The Duchess set her tablet aside. "I think you're right. Traditions should serve people, not the other way around." Charlotte flipped another page. "Miss Winters says that Queen Victoria used the provision because her father got sick after standing in the rain. She said it was the first time anyone thought a guard needed protecting. She was ahead of her time," the Duchess said. "And so are you." Charlotte beamed, but didn't look up. She was already turning the next page, already looking for the next question. By the next morning, news of the rare royal act had spread, not with tabloid frenzy, but quiet admiration. Headlines didn't scream. Instead, they spoke of dignity, honor, and the moment a 9-year-old reminded the nation of something ancient, and still relevant, royal weather consideration revived after decade-long silence. Princess Charlotte honors Queen's Guard with historic protocol. When a child reminded the crown what tradition means, commentators praised the gesture. Military veterans voiced appreciation. Historians applauded the accuracy of Charlotte's recall, and the grace of its execution. Even critics of monarchy found themselves oddly moved. In classrooms, teachers shared the story to illustrate how compassion can live within structure. In barracks, guards recounted it with pride. And in homes across the country, people talked, not about royalty's grandeur, but about its responsibility. Meanwhile, Sergeant Cataric, now resting under medical observation, received a quiet visit from a senior palace official. No cameras, no publicity. Just a brief message, personally signed, "In duty fulfilled beyond expectation, the crown sees you. In service carried through adversity, the crown thanks you." He placed it beside his cot and smiled faintly. Tradition hadn't abandoned him in the storm. It had stood beside him, under a royal umbrella. Sergeant Ewan Cataric sat upright on a narrow cot inside the palace's staff medical wing. A warm cup of tea steamed quietly on the side table beside him. He wasn't used to being inside during duty hours. The silence felt louder somehow, but he had accepted the temporary reassignment without protest. His uniform had been taken for drying and repairs, his fingers were bandaged lightly for cold exposure. But his posture remained erect, military straight, as though his spine refused to forget its duty. The signed note from the royal household still sat on the table where he had left it. He glanced at it occasionally, not to reread the words, but to remind himself that the moment had been real. In a notebook he carried from his deployments, he scribbled down the date, June 6, 2025. Reign provision enacted. Princess Charlotte. He paused, then added a line underneath, "Not every salute comes with a trumpet. Some come with an umbrella." He smiled to himself. The phrasing was rough, but the sentiment was honest. His grandfather would have understood. So would his father, across Britain, and in quiet corners of the world where people still cared about duty, tradition, and symbolism, the story of what had happened outside Buckingham Palace found its way into unexpected places. In a classroom in Edinburgh, a teacher paused her lesson to share an article about the event. A boy raised his hand and asked, "Can a rule be old and good?" "Yes," the teacher said. "If it remembers why it started." In a retirement home in Bristol, two former Coldstream guards watched a replayed segment on the news. One of them wiped a hand under his eye and muttered, "Took a little girl to remind the brass what heart looks like." Even among palace staff, the story became part of hallway conversations. Young aides asked older stewards if they remembered the last time the protocol had been used. Many didn't. A few did, but none had seen it handled with such poise, and at the King's College Lecture Hall, Dr. Ashbury updated her syllabus. Under the section Evolution of Royal Protocol, she added a new subheading. The 2025 Weather Invocation, Compassion Within Ceremony. 2 weeks later, the ceremonial umbrella, still drying under careful preservation conditions, was returned to its sealed display case in the Royal Archives. A new notation was added to the small brass plaque below it, last used, June 6, 2025, Princess Charlotte of Cambridge. Somewhere in the same wing of the archive, a page from a duty log noted the rain-soaked guard who had stood unmoved for hours. His name, rank, and recognition were recorded in the quiet, lasting way only history knows how to hold memory. Back at the palace, the guard rotation continued, day after day, as it had for centuries. New soldiers stood tall at the gates, knowing that if the storm ever turned violent again, the crown would remember not just the pageantry, but the people inside the uniforms. And in a private corner of the royal nursery, Charlotte marked a sticky note in her book: "Tradition means knowing when to stand still, and when to step forward." The world had not changed overnight, but it had, perhaps, remembered something important, thanks to a single act of recognition, a soaked soldier with a steady heart and a child who knew her history. If you enjoy this content, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and subscribe to my channel. Your subscription means a lot to me and gives me great motivation to make more videos. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the video.